The story begins in a futuristic high school, nestled in the heart of a bustling city on Earth. Earth is no longer just a planet, it's the center of intergalactic cooperation. Students from across the galaxy attend this prestigious school, learning to blend their unique cultures, technologies, and histories into one shared future. Human teenagers walk the halls alongside towering insect-like beings from the Zorvian planet, telepathic aliens from Velair, and even robot students with sleek chrome bodies and advanced artificial minds. Among this sea of diversity, one student stands out, not for her height or her species, but because of her visible differences. Zyra is a small, alien girl with soft, bioluminescent skin that pulses faintly with glowing patterns, like a quiet aurora. She comes from a peaceful planet, one that has not yet discovered advanced technology or space travel. She is far from the sleek, tech-savvy aliens who fill the school's halls, and far more reserved than her fellow students. Zyra doesn't have a personal force field or a hoverboard like the others. Her clothes are simple, made from natural materials, unlike the flashy, high-tech outfits her classmates wear. Her planet, once full of lush forests and serene lakes, was devastated in a sudden, brutal attack by an alien empire, leaving her people in a state of poverty. Now, Zyra is here on Earth, trying to learn, trying to fit in, but it's a struggle. As she walks down the crowded hallway, her heart sinks when she hears the cruel laughter echoing behind her. It's the same group of bullies, the Raxians, a gang of powerful alien students from the warrior planet Raxos. They're known for their strength and advanced weaponry. Their leader, Korak, towers over Zyra with his muscular build, his skin dark like polished stone, and his sharp, glowing eyes that gleam as he watches her. They crowd around Zyra, sneering at her, making cruel jokes. "What's with the glow, Zyra?" Korak mocks, tapping her bioluminescent skin. "Are you some kind of glowing pet from a backwater world?" His voice is filled with condescension. The others laugh in unison, their voices sharp and mocking. Zyra tries to ignore them, but the words cut deep. They call her primitive, weak, and useless. They don't know the pain of her people, their home destroyed, their lives torn apart by ruthless invaders. They don't understand that her glow is a result of her species' unique connection to the natural world, an ability she's always been proud of. But here, in this school, it's nothing but a target. With her head bowed, she continues walking, trying to make herself as small as possible. Her heart races, and her eyes sting with tears that begin to glow in the dim light of the hallway. She wipes them away quickly, hoping no one sees, but the tears just seem to make her even more of a spectacle. Zyra's pain goes unnoticed by most of the students, who are too busy with their own lives to care. But there is one person who notices her. Ethan, a quiet human boy who has always preferred reading books to participating in the endless streams of social events, watches from the edge of the hallway. He's standing by a large window, his hand resting against the cool glass, gazing out at the sprawling city below. He's always been an observer, not the type to get involved in the drama of high school life. But something about Zyra tugs at his heart. He's noticed her before, her gentle nature, her shy smile when she tries to interact with others. He's seen her struggle to fit in, and the way her classmates laugh at her makes something twist inside him. Ethan sees the tears in Zyra's eyes. The glow in them isn't just from the bioluminescence of her species, it's from pain. He feels his stomach tighten in anger, but he doesn't know what he can do. He's just a regular human, and compared to the aliens around him, he's nothing special. But he can't stand to see someone treated like this. Ethan watches as Zyra quickly hurries away, her head still lowered, and the bullies follow behind her, jeering. He wants to step in, to say something, but he freezes. He knows it's dangerous. The Raxians are not just bullies, they're powerful, respected, and feared. They could make his life miserable without even trying. But despite the fear that rises in him, he can't shake the image of Zyra's glowing tears. His heart beats faster, and a determination begins to grow inside him. Someone needs to stand up for her. And maybe, just maybe, that someone is him. Zyra comes from a planet called Krya, a peaceful world that has always lived in harmony with nature. Unlike the flashy, high-tech worlds most of her classmates come from, Krya was a place of rolling green hills, crystal-clear lakes, and skies filled with birds that sang in the mornings. The people of Krya lived simple lives, farmers, builders, healers, focusing on family and community. There were no massive cities or flying cars, just quiet villages and wide fields. But that was before the attack. A few years ago, Krya's peaceful existence was shattered when a powerful alien empire, known for their ruthless technology, invaded. Their ships were enormous, their weapons were far beyond anything Krya had ever seen. The invaders destroyed entire villages, leaving nothing but ashes in their wake. The once beautiful land was now scarred, and the people of Krya were left to rebuild from the ground up, struggling with poverty and fear. Zyra's family was one of the few to survive the attack. When the invaders came, they hid, but everything changed afterward. Her family's farm was lost, and the scars of war were visible everywhere. The peaceful life she had known was gone forever. She had been just a child then, but now, as a teenager, she carries the weight of that loss. When her parents heard about a scholarship for students to study on Earth, they sent her here, hoping that a better education might help her rebuild Krya one day. It wasn't easy, but Zyra didn't want to disappoint them, so she bravely made the journey to Earth, a planet known for its diversity and technological advancements. It seemed like a place of opportunity, where new friends and new beginnings awaited her. But it wasn't what she expected. At first, she thought she'd feel at home surrounded by so many different species and cultures. After all, Earth was a hub of galactic cooperation, with beings from every corner of the galaxy coming together to learn and grow. But soon, she realized that even in this diverse world, she didn't belong. Zyra didn't have the same gadgets and technology that the other students carried. Many of her classmates came from planets with advanced tech, like Valoris, a world that had mastered teleportation, or Zenithos, where AI was integrated into everyday life. Their clothes were made of fabrics that could change color and shape, their gadgets could float and talk, and their knowledge of space travel was far beyond anything Krya could offer. Zyra, on the other hand, didn't even know how to use some of the simplest devices. She still used paper notebooks, and her clothes were made from basic cloth, simple and practical. She tried not to let it bother her. She focused on her studies, keeping to herself, and tried to ignore the whispers and glances from other students. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the feeling of being an outsider. Her classmates would often laugh when she didn't understand a lesson, or when she struggled to use a piece of technology that everyone else found easy. They called her simple and primitive, reminding her daily that she was different. Even though she made a few attempts to talk to others, it never seemed to work. Every time she tried to make friends, they would look at her with a strange expression and slowly walk away, clearly uncomfortable with her presence. Zyra began to feel invisible, like no one could see past her differences to understand who she truly was. The loneliness became unbearable. At night, when the school lights were dim, Zyra would find a quiet corner of the school grounds and look up at the sky. There, among the stars, she found her only comfort. The stars reminded her of home, the stars that hung over Krya, shining brightly through the long nights. There, she felt connected to the world she had lost. The stars were the same, and for a moment, she could almost pretend she was back home, safe and surrounded by the people she loved. The night sky was her escape, the only place where she could feel free from the whispers and the stares. In those moments, she didn't feel like the odd one out. She was just another small being, staring up at the same stars that had once watched over her peaceful world. But deep down, Zyra knew she couldn't stay lost in the stars forever. She had come to Earth for a reason, to learn, to grow, and to help her people rebuild their world. Yet every day was a struggle, and she couldn't help but wonder if she was strong enough to face this new life. The feeling of being alone weighed on her, and it seemed like the more she tried to fit in, the farther away she became from the world around her. Ethan was not the kind of person who would stand out in a crowd. He was quiet, kept to himself, and always seemed to be lost in his thoughts. His friends were few, and he never really felt like he fit in. While other students in the high school rushed to keep up with the latest trends, Ethan preferred the comfort of a good book or the quiet hum of a classic movie. He often found himself sitting by the window in the cafeteria, looking out at the busy streets, wishing for something more exciting in his life. At this school, humans were no longer the dominant species, and Earth was just one part of a massive, diverse galaxy. The school was a melting pot of cultures, aliens with strange powers, robotic beings with artificial minds, and humans trying to find their place in this strange, multi-species world. Most of the students at school weren't bothered by the mix of species and technology. They'd grown up surrounded by it, and for them, it was normal. But for Ethan, it was different. He had always felt like an outsider in a world of the extraordinary. But one thing that made him stand out from most of the humans at school was his complete lack of fear when it came to aliens or their advanced technology. He didn't fear the towering Zorvian aliens who could change shape at will or the students with telepathic powers that allowed them to read minds. Ethan wasn't afraid of them. He didn't see them as better or worse than him. In fact, he admired many of them. But he wasn't intimidated by their gadgets, their powers, or their strength. What mattered to him was something far more simple, the kind of person they were. Ethan's upbringing had taught him to look beyond the surface. Raised by his grandmother, who had been a war hero during a time when Earth was under attack from alien forces, Ethan grew up hearing stories of humanity's courage. His grandmother had often told him about the time when Earth was on the brink of destruction, and how humanity fought back against overwhelming forces. She spoke of the battles they had won not with superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but with heart and determination. It was these stories that shaped Ethan's perspective. He believed that no matter how powerful or advanced an alien species might be, they were never invincible. Human strength, in all its forms, could stand up against anything. This belief became even stronger when he first noticed Zyra. She wasn't like the other students. While the others were loud, confident, and brimming with the latest tech, Zyra seemed quiet, almost invisible. She often sat alone, her head down, as though trying to shrink into the shadows. Ethan couldn't help but feel there was more to her than met the eye. There was something in the way she carried herself, even in the face of constant bullying. When Ethan first saw the bullies pick on her, it was a typical day in the hallway. Zyra was walking to class when the group of Raxians, alien students from a warlike planet, began taunting her, mocking her clothes and her glowing skin. He saw the hurt in her eyes, the way she flinched when they laughed, and it made something stir inside him. It wasn't just that she was being bullied, he couldn't stand seeing anyone treated that way. But there was something more. He knew the pain of being different, of feeling like you didn't belong, and he could see it in her every time she walked into a room. Despite his natural shyness, Ethan knew that he couldn't stay quiet. He wasn't a hero, but he couldn't just stand by and let the bullying go on. He started with small actions. At lunch, he began sitting next to Zyra, even though it meant dealing with awkward glances from the other students. He'd quietly join her, offering a friendly smile and a quiet hello. It wasn't much, but it was something. Sometimes, when the Raxians were nearby, Ethan would make sure to be there to walk with her to class, positioning himself between Zyra and the bullies. He'd make casual comments that seemed to deflect their taunts, like talking about a new book or making a joke about a teacher, anything to take attention away from her. One day, after the bullies had called her weak for the 100th time, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. As they walked past him, laughing, he quietly confronted them, saying, "Why don't you pick on someone your own size? Or is it just easier to bully someone who doesn't fight back?" He said it without raising his voice, without aggression, but the words had an effect. The Raxians didn't know how to respond at first. It wasn't what they expected from a human. Even though Ethan's actions were small, they didn't go unnoticed. Zyra began to look at him differently. There was a flicker of hope in her eyes when she saw him sitting with her, and a soft smile when he helped her with her studies. Zyra struggled with certain subjects, like understanding the complex human history lessons, and Ethan patiently tutored her, taking the time to explain things in a way she could understand. It wasn't just about schoolwork, it was about showing her that someone cared. Ethan didn't know it at the time, but his small acts of kindness were building something more. He was becoming a source of strength for Zyra, and in doing so, he was learning that sometimes, standing up for what's right doesn't require heroics, just the courage to do the right thing, even when it seems like the world is against you. As the days passed, the bullying didn't stop. In fact, it only got worse. The Raxians, frustrated by Ethan's interference, began to target him directly. At first, they had mocked Zyra and ignored him, but now, they were getting angrier. The group started to see Ethan as a problem, a human who wasn't afraid to stand up to them, someone who wasn't intimidated by their size or advanced technology. One afternoon, as Ethan and Zyra were walking down the hallway, the bullies appeared once again. This time, it wasn't just Korak, the leader of the group. It was Rax, a larger and far more intimidating alien who was known for his strength and high-tech gadgets. Rax was a student from a planet called Draxer, famous for its advanced weaponry in militaristic society. His mechanical arm whirred with an ominous hum, and the glowing blue energy blade that extended from his wrist made even the bravest student step aside in fear. Rax's sharp eyes locked onto Ethan as he approached. "So, human," he sneered, "you think you're brave, standing up for this primitive?" He jerked his thumb toward Zyra, who was walking a few steps behind Ethan. "What's so special about her? She's nothing. You're nothing." The word stung, but Ethan didn't flinch. He stood tall, looking directly at Rax with quiet determination. He had never been the toughest kid at school, and he sure wasn't the most popular. But there was something inside him now, a feeling that had been growing since he first saw Zyra being picked on. He couldn't just back down, not when things had gone this far. "She is a person," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the fear building up inside him. "And she doesn't deserve to be treated this way." "Neither do I." Rax laughed, a low, rumbling sound that echoed down the hallway. "You think you can stop me? You're just a human. You have no weapons, no powers. You can't fight me." He stepped closer, his mechanical arm flexing, making a sharp clicking noise as it adjusted. The energy blade hummed louder, glowing with dangerous energy. "But I think I'll teach you a lesson. Maybe after this, you'll know your place." The hallway seemed to grow colder as Rax's threat hung in the air. Ethan's heart raced in his chest, but he refused to back down. His grandmother's voice echoed in his mind, "Courage doesn't mean you aren't afraid. It means you act despite the fear." She had taught him about humanity's greatest strength, our ability to stand up, no matter the odds, when it mattered most. He could hear her stories of Earth's darkest times, of battles fought and won against overwhelming forces, reminding him that being human wasn't about technology or strength, it was about heart, determination, and standing for what was right. Rax raised his energy blade, the blue light flashing dangerously. Ethan could feel the heat from the blade, the air around it crackling with energy. He stood his ground, trying to ignore the panic swirling in his stomach. The other students had gathered around, forming a loose circle, watching in silence. Some whispered nervously, others looked excited to see a showdown, but none of them dared to intervene. For a moment, it seemed like Rax might strike, but Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "I'm not scared of you." His words were quiet but full of resolve. He wasn't just saying them for Rax, he was reminding himself too. "I'm not scared." The Raxian sneered, clearly taken aback by Ethan's defiance. He wasn't used to being challenged by a human. Rax's eyes narrowed, and he seemed to hesitate for a split second, enough for Ethan to feel a spark of hope. But Rax quickly shook off the moment and stepped forward. You should be, he growled. He raised his blade again, and this time, the students around them tensed, ready for what they thought would be the end of the confrontation. But then, just as Rax's arm was about to swing, a voice interrupted. Stop it. It was Zyra. She had been watching from a distance, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never seen anyone stand up to the Raxians like this, and seeing Ethan face them without fear, without hesitation, filled her with a sense of awe. She had always thought humans were weak, that they only survived because of their technology, but now, she was starting to see something different in Ethan. He was showing her a strength she had never known existed, a strength that came from within. Rax looked at her, his gaze filled with contempt. What do you want, primitive? He spat. But Zyra didn't flinch. Her voice was steady, and for the first time, she felt a spark of confidence rise within her. He's right. You don't scare me either. It was a small statement, but it was a turning point for her. Zyra had never believed in human courage, but now, she was starting to understand it. She had never had anyone stand up for her before. And seeing Ethan do it, not just for her but for what was right, made her believe that humans were capable of more than she had ever imagined. The Raxians seemed to sense the shift in the air. Their confidence began to waver, just a little. They hadn't expected this kind of resistance from either of them. For the first time, it seemed like they might not have the upper hand. The tension had been building for days, but it all came to a head when Rax and his friends cornered Ethan and Zyra in a secluded part of the school. It was an area no one really used, tucked away behind the old science wing, where the hallways were dim and empty. The buzzing of overhead lights was the only sound, and the air felt thick, like something was about to happen. Rax's voice was low and dangerous as he stepped forward, his energy blades still humming ominously in the air. You've made a big mistake, human, he growled, his eyes narrowing at Ethan. You don't know when to quit, do you? Maybe you think you can stand up to us, but you're nothing. You're weak. Ethan stood tall, his heart racing in his chest, but his resolve stronger than ever. He refused to step back. His grandmother's lessons were ringing in his ears, never back down when it matters. But even as he stared at Rax and his friends, the odds were stacked against him. They were bigger, stronger, and armed with weapons Ethan couldn't even dream of. His fists clenched, but there was no way he could fight them. He wasn't a warrior, he was just a human teenager. Zyra stood beside him, her body tense, her eyes downcast. She hated feeling like this, helpless, weak, but this time, something was different. Ethan hadn't run away when things got tough. He hadn't backed down, even when every part of him must have been scared. She felt the urge to do something, to protect him, but how could she? She didn't have the strength or the power to stand up to these bullies. Or did she? As Rax raised his blade to strike, something shifted inside Zyra. It wasn't a loud noise or a flash of light, it was a quiet, almost ancient feeling, deep inside her. She had always known that her people had a strange, quiet connection to the energy of their planet, but she never thought it would mean anything for her. Her world had been peaceful, quiet, and without conflict, until the attack by the alien empire that shattered everything. But now, in this moment, standing beside Ethan, she felt it, a pulse of power, of energy that had been dormant for years, suddenly awakening inside her. Her bioluminescent skin began to glow brighter, the faint blue light shimmering across her skin like starlight. At first it was subtle, a flicker, a soft pulse, but then it grew, until her entire body seemed to radiate light. The glow was so bright that it made the shadows in the hallway seem to bend and shift. Ethan turned to her, confused. Zyra, what's happening? He asked, his voice full of worry. But before she could answer, the surge of energy exploded out from her, rippling through the air like a shockwave. It wasn't just light, it was pure, raw energy, a force that came from deep within her, an ancient ability she hadn't known she possessed. The blast sent a wave of power through the hallway, and in an instant, Rax and his friends were thrown off their feet. Their weapons flew from their hands, crashing into the walls as if they were toys. The bullies landed hard on the ground, disoriented and stunned, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Zyra stood there, breathless, her body still glowing faintly with the energy that had erupted from her. For a moment, the hallway was silent. The light from her skin flickered softly, like a fading star. Ethan stared at her in shock, his mouth slightly open. What was that?" he whispered, unable to process what he had just witnessed. Zyra looked down at her hands, still trembling from the power that had surged through her. She had no idea how it had happened. It was as if something deep inside her had been unlocked, a part of her heritage that had lain dormant, waiting for the right moment to awaken. Her species had always had a connection to the energy of their home planet, but it was thought to be a power long lost to time. She had never believed it could exist in her, until now. Rax and his friends were slowly getting back on their feet, their eyes wide with shock and confusion. They were stunned, humiliated, and they had no idea what had just happened. Their confidence was shattered. The powerful alien bullies who had once mocked Zyra for being weak were now completely out of their element. They had never faced anything like this before. Their weapons lay scattered across the floor, useless against the raw force of Zyra's power. Rax glared at Zyra, but his arrogance had vanished. "This isn't over," he muttered, his voice thick with disbelief and fear. "You won't get away with this." Without another word, he turned and gestured for his friends to follow. They retreated, leaving behind their weapons and their pride, their faces red with embarrassment. They had underestimated both Ethan and Zyra, and now they were defeated, not just physically, but mentally. They had been shown something they hadn't expected, that they weren't as invincible as they thought. As the bullies fled down the hallway, Ethan turned to Zyra, his eyes filled with admiration. "That was amazing. How did you?" Zyra smiled, though it was a tired, uncertain smile. "I didn't know I could do that. It just happened." She looked at him, her heart racing. "But I couldn't just let them hurt you. Not after everything you've done for me." Ethan shook his head, his smile wide. "You don't have to thank me. You're incredible, Zyra. I don't think anyone else could have done that." For the first time, Zyra felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, hope. The kind of hope that comes from knowing that, no matter what happens, there are people, humans, who will stand beside her, fight for her, and help her discover her own strength. The hallway was quiet, the only sound being the soft hum of the lights above. Zyra stood there, still glowing faintly from the energy surge, her body still trembling from the unexpected burst of power. The bullies were gone, and with them, the fear that had weighed on her for so long. For the first time, she felt a strange sense of relief that she wasn't the weak, helpless alien they had all thought her to be. But with that relief came confusion. She didn't understand what had just happened. How had she done that? What was that power inside her? She turned to look at Ethan, her heart still racing. He was staring at her, his eyes wide with amazement. There was no fear in his gaze, just admiration and something else, something deeper. She saw him take a step closer, his expression soft and proud. You were incredible, Zyra," Ethan said quietly, his voice filled with awe. "I've never seen anything like that before." Zyra looked down at her hands, her bioluminescent skin flickering softly. It felt like a dream, like something impossible. But the look in Ethan's eyes told her it was real. "I didn't know I could do that," she whispered. I didn't even know I had that power." Ethan stepped closer, his hand resting gently on her shoulder. "Maybe you didn't know it, but I think you always had it. It just took something, or someone, to make it come out." He looked at her with a kind of understanding she had never seen before. "You've always had the strength inside you, Zyra. You just needed to believe in it." Zyra felt a wave of emotion wash over her. She had spent so long feeling like an outsider, feeling like she didn't belong. Her home planet had been destroyed, and she had come to Earth, hoping to find a new place, a new family, but instead, she had been rejected, bullied, and made to feel small. She had thought she was weak, both physically and emotionally, but now, standing in front of Ethan, she realized something had changed. She wasn't alone anymore. She had someone who saw her for who she truly was, someone who believed in her when no one else did. And that belief, that simple act of standing by her, had awakened something powerful inside her. "I never thought I would feel like I belong here," Zyra said softly, her voice trembling with the weight of her emotions. "Not with all the others being so different, so much more advanced. I thought I would always be, out of place." Ethan smiled, his eyes warm and full of kindness. "You belong here because you're you, Zyra. Not because of your powers, or your technology, or where you come from. You belong here because you have a heart. And hearts like yours are what make us stronger." Zyra's heart swelled at his words. For the first time in a long time, she felt something she had never felt before, acceptance. Not just from the people around her, but from herself. She had always viewed herself as different, as an outsider. But now, with Ethan by her side, she realized that maybe it was her differences that made her unique, and that made her strong. Ethan continued, his voice gentle but firm. "Sometimes, it's the ones who are underestimated that turn out to be the strongest," he said, his words carrying weight. "People always look at you and think they know what you're capable of. But they don't. They never see the full picture. It's not about technology or strength. It's about heart, and you've got more of that than anyone I know." Zyra felt a tear slip down her cheek, but it wasn't one of sadness. It was a tear of gratitude, of relief. She had always believed that she had to be something else to fit in, more powerful, more advanced, more like everyone else. But now she knew the truth. She didn't have to change who she was to be accepted. She had her own strength, and it was enough. The atmosphere around the school began to shift. The students who had once ignored Zyra or mocked her now looked at her with a new sense of respect. The bullies who had once been feared and untouchable were no longer as intimidating. They had been shown something they hadn't expected, something that changed the way they saw her and, maybe, the way they saw themselves. Rax and his friends had been humiliated, their arrogance crushed by the power of something they hadn't even understood. And though they still held their pride, it was clear that they no longer saw themselves as invincible. The students began to whisper among themselves, and the rumors spread quickly. They talked about the human boy who stood up to the aliens and the alien girl who possessed a power no one had ever seen. Slowly but surely, the school's atmosphere changed. Zyra was no longer the outsider. She wasn't just the weak, strange alien who didn't belong. She was someone who had stood her ground, who had fought back in the only way she could, and had won. Ethan and Zyra shared a quiet moment together, standing side by side. "You're not alone anymore, Zyra," Ethan said, his voice soft but filled with certainty. "You've got me. And that's all you need." Zyra looked at him, her heart full. "And I've got you." In that moment, she realized that she didn't need to have all the answers. She didn't need to understand everything. All she needed was to know that she was no longer alone, and that she had someone who believed in her. Someone who chose to stand by her, no matter how different she was. For the first time, Zyra truly felt like she belonged.